This lesson is about attic inspections. The attic inspection is one of the more important lessons that you're going to have. When I go into an attic, I'm looking for several things. I'm looking for ventilation, I'm looking for water penetration, I'm looking for mold, electrical boxes, insulation levels. It's just very important. So let's get on with it.
Today's lesson, we're going to be showing you how to perform an attic inspection. Now, there are multiple items we're going to be looking for. 1, insulation. 2, water infiltration. 3, we're going to be looking for microbial growth. And 4, we're going to be looking at the overall structure of the attic. And last, we're going to be looking for ventilation. How does air actually come into the attic and then escaping? Now, as we were walking up, we're going to be noticing, are there any handrails? We're going to be feeling, as when we're coming up, what does the stairs feel like? Are they uneven? Is there a bounce? Now, as you can see, there are no guardrails, no wall or anything. So if you have children, there is a possibility of a child falling onto the stairs. So we'll consider that a safety issue. Now, once we get done with that, one of the first things that we're going to be looking for is the overall structure. What do we have? Typically there are trusses or rafters. In this attic we have a rafter system. So we have rafters coming up to a ridge board, and then we have collar ties. We don't specifically get involved into the engineering and architecture of the home because that was designed by a professional and or licensed architect. We're here to see if the structure over a period of time still has its integrity. Now, when it comes to the rafter system, we're going to be looking at each of the rafter boards and then looking at the actual rafter ridge right up in here. Now, when you looked at the 2 rafters that are connecting to the ridge board, we're going to be looking for, are there any gaps? Are there twisting? Has it shifted to the left and right? Because anything that is happening in the foundation itself, it's going to be exponentially shown in these locations. So what we're going to be doing is starting on one particular side, and we're going to look at each connection point of the ridge with the rafters all the way down. Now, once we perform that, we're going to have some, observations from the side. We're going to be looking for water infiltration. Now, when you come to these older homes, these particular decking, which we have just plank boards, there is going to be staining, and we're going to try to see if there's an active leak. So when it comes to stored items, we're going to be looking for that stain and then looking at the storage items to see if they're damp. Are there any rust stains? Are there previous pooling of water? And what we're going to do again is we're going to be looking at one side up and down from the soffit to the ridge in each of these channels all the way down. Then we're going to walk all the way down the attic, and then we're going to continue all the way down to this section. Now, when we do that, we're actually going to be able to see what type of ventilation we have. Just because it may look like soffits on the outside, maybe they have the vinyl perforated, and maybe outside we'll see a ridge cap, that doesn't mean they actually have it. On this particular house, they actually have the perforated soffit, and as we can see when we're looking, there are no true soffits. So what they ended up doing is just vinyl siding and then put the soffit boards right underneath the eaves and just called it a day. And then as we continue going upward and looking at the ridge, there is no ridge vent. So on the outside it looks like you have ventilation, but in fact there is no ventilation. And that's how we verify and validate particular characteristics of the roof system. When we're outside inspecting the roof and ventilation, when we come inside the attic, we verify and validate if those characteristics actually do exist. As we continue our attic inspection, we're going to be looking at that ridge board and the rafters. And specifically, we want to make sure those rafters are flush with the ridge board and they're aligned with one another to make sure there's no racking and or gaps. Because as we stated before, anything that's happening in the foundation area, it's going to be exponentially seen up in the attic area. So as we continue, we have our chimney, and this is called corbelling. It's actually placed on an angle specifically, so as water enters, it's going to be on the hot side and it's going to be evaporating prior to reaching down to the bottom. So it's built specifically on an angle. So it's straight up from the basement, enters the attic, and then comes on an angle. Now, when we do have the penetration or any penetration in the attic through the roof, is we're going to be looking for any moisture. Because the chimney does have flashing, there's always a high possibility based on the age of the home that you're going to have some water staining. So when we do have water staining or any of the sort, again, we're going to be looking to see if there's any water that's going to be shown on the bottom where there's stored items. But if we don't see anything, and if we do have staining, we always want to make sure we have our moisture detector. All right, and this is just to verify and validate if something is dry or if something is actively wet. So we're going to take our moisture, we're going to place it right here, and it's dry. As you can notice, 98% were made of water, so that is showing that we're water. As you can see, we have our plumbing stack. And for this location, we're going to be looking how it's penetrating outside the roof area. And again, we're going to be looking for moisture, stains, and you can see how there was a damaged roof. So when you have an older home, these stains may be due to the previous roof system. And now with the newer roof, these stains are no longer indication of an active leak. And again, you want to be looking through the attic region at each of these particular penetrations. Now, let's take a look on the insulation in the attic. When it comes to a rafter structure home, typically we have a fully floored attic, which is great because you have fantastic storage. The difficult part for home inspectors is to identify the insulation. Now, as we're performing the home inspection, we're going to be looking for, is there any indication or where we can find that insulation? And as you can see over here, we do have some insulation, and this is actually rock wool. Now, the point that we want to ensure is that we do have insulation, all right? Now, just because there's rock wool here, it doesn't mean there couldn't be different insulation throughout the attic floor. So here we can see there's a hole, so we continue and we see rock wool insulation. Now, as you're walking through, if there are cracks between the floorboards, you want to take your flashlight and look in between there just to verify and validate that there is rock wool insulation. Now, because we can't see everything, the assumption that we have is there is rock wool. If there is other insulation, if we can't see it, as long as we give our best effort in performing that inspection for identification, that's what we're going to do. But you're not going to be moving things around to do that. You're just going to be looking for those open spaces in the attic. And this is how you perform an attic inspection. I'm going to show you how to perform an inspection in a finished attic area. As you can see, we have two knee wall access. There is no access to the ceiling area, and all we have are the knee walls. So what we're going to do when that happens is we're going to inspect on what we can visually see. So let's get started. First, we're going to examine what is in the location, make sure it's safe and things of that nature. So we notice that there's insulation where the decking is, so we can't visually see that. Right over here, it looks like at one time there may have been some water staining. And you can see that, look at this. We got a rip and we have some staining there. We know that there's a newer roof on the home, so this could have been a earlier defect. So you're gonna
measure this with your moisture meter. So let's try to take out our moisture meter. So I have a pinless moisture meter. And what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that this is set on the right thing. So this is set on soft wood. And let's go over in this location. And that is dry. And how do we know that it's dry? It's because we're made out of water. So I'm touching it, so it's showing that. So that's what you want to do. Anytime you see any staining, you want to pull out your moisture meter here and to determine if the staining is active, if there's an active leak or not. You can't really start going and start pulling the insulation down, because if you pull it there, then why aren't you going to pull it in other locations? Especially when it comes to roofs. Just because you see a leak at one location doesn't mean that is the entry point. So the next thing you want to do is we're going to crawl all the way down to that end. And you want to make sure that you do this, because if you don't, you can see that we have some more staining. If you're not going to go examine this, and if there's a defect and it can be visually seen, you can be liable for that. Now again, of course, you have to make sure that you're in a safe condition. You never want to go in an area where you feel it is unsafe. And again, we're not seeing any mold or anything like that. We want to keep on going down. Look at the overall condition. This looks good. No issues here. And again, we're looking at the roof, you're looking at the walls. All right. So, this is how you end up inspecting a knee wall area. And you'll end up doing the same on the other side. So when you're looking on your sheet, you're going to identify that this is a knee wall. You're going to start identifying that this is actually on 18 on center, not on 16. We have insulation on the roof. We can't tell if there's any insulation because of the plank boards. When we inspect the general interior of the attic region, this is going to be, when we're upstairs in the attic, we're going to consider this as the general interior. But because this has a morning kitchen and a bathroom, and that's large enough, this could be considered a small efficiency apartment. So you can inspect this using your apartment worksheet, or you can inspect this by adding another sheet for kitchen, and then adding another worksheet for bathroom. And then you would inspect this area during the general interior, all right? Because the attic is specifically just the attic. So we can see in here, this is the other knee wall area. And we say we got some extended wires here. And again, you would have to crawl all the way through on each end, and you're looking for more or less water infiltration. So this is one way to inspect an attic section. Now, an attic, we consider this a non-livable space, all right? And that's how we define an attic. Now, if this wasn't finished, then we would inspect everything, and we're going to show you that in another video. So for this video specifically, you're looking at knee wall attic space and inspection, and that's how.
In this chapter, you will learn what is an attic, standards of practice for inspecting an attic, roof structure, ventilation, types of insulation, and typical defects in an attic. An attic is defined as unlivable space between the roof covering and a living space. Inspecting the attic can reveal a tremendous amount of information for your client. For example, overall structural integrity of the roof, water infiltration or leakage, proper ventilation, insulation, fire hazards, electrical connections, and chimney conditions. It is essential that every attic be inspected. So as a home inspector, if you do not have access to an attic, you need to identify this to your client and recommend access to the attic be created. Home inspectors shall observe and report on any safe and readily accessible attic space, describing the method of observation used and conditions observed. Home inspectors are not required to enter any attic where no walkable floor is present or where entry would, in the opinion of the home inspector, be unsafe. Safety is always important. Before entering any confined space, inform another person and make sure you have an exit plan. The inspector shall inspect the insulation of unfinished spaces, the ventilation of attic spaces, mechanical ventilation systems, and report on the general absence or lack of insulation. The inspector is not required to enter the attic or any unfinished space that is not readily accessible or where entry could cause damage or pose a safety hazard to the inspector in his or her opinion. To move, touch, or disturb insulation. To move, touch, or disturb vapor retarders. Break or otherwise damage the surface's finish or weather seal on or around access panels and covers. Home inspectors are also not required to identify the composition or exact R value of insulation material, activate thermostatically operated fans, determine the types of material used in insulation or wrapping of pipes, ducts, jackets, boilers, and wiring, or determine the adequacy of ventilation. When inspecting an attic, you will observe, normally, two basic construction techniques: trusses and rafters. Even though we are not building inspectors, as a home inspector, you must have a fundamental understanding of how trusses and rafters work. A truss is defined as a structure comprising one or more triangular units constructed with straight members whose ends are connected at joints referred to as nodes. External forces and reactions to those forces are considered to act only at the nodes and result in forces in the members, which are either tensile or compressive forces. A rafter is defined as a structural member that supports a roof deck. A key member in roof rafter design is the collar tie. Collar ties are designed to tie together the tops of opposing rafters. This helps brace the roof framing against uplift caused by the wind. Collar ties must be placed in the upper third of the roof. Ventilation in an attic is very important to the home inspector. Ventilation provides air circulation throughout the attic and reduces overall heat and moisture buildups. There are 4 common types of ventilation: soffit vents, gable vents, ridge vents, and roof vents. Proper ventilation is critical for each of the seasons, especially for the summer and winter months. During the summer months, the air temperature in attics may increase to over 100 degrees. Therefore, improper ventilation, or an unventilated attic, could potentially reduce the life of your asphalt shingles, and secondly, radiating heat from the attic will enter your house, causing the cooling system to operate longer than normal. Improper ventilation in an attic during the winter months is a severe condition. When warm air comes in contact with cold air, condensation is created. This moisture generated in the attic space during the winter will lead to the growth of mold. As a home inspector, when inspecting the insulation in the attic, there are only 2 issues to be considered: location and type of insulation. As far as the level of insulation, use the following rule of thumb. It's insufficient if you see the top of the wood joist. It's adequate if it's 4 inches above the wood joist. And it's good if there's a double layer of insulation. Fiberglass insulation is the most common material used to insulate residences. Fiberglass insulation typically comes in large rolls called bats. The bats are rolled out between the floor joists. The R value is about 3.2 per inch. Foam insulation is sprayed onto building surfaces or in crevices in the building. The foam adheres to the building structure and hardens to form insulation. The R value of foam insulation varies depending on what the foam consists of, but it generally falls between 4.5 to 6.5 per inch. Mineral wool is made from steel slag and other chemicals that are spun into a fibrous material. It can be made into bats, similar to fiberglass insulation, or into a material that is blown into ceilings and walls. The R value is 3.1 per inch. Polystyrene boards can be used as home insulation and is often attached to a building's exterior and then covered with an exterior building material. Polystyrene boards are often used in combination with another type of insulation to provide a greater effect. The R value ranges between 4 and 5 per inch. Cellulose insulation is basically shredded paper, often recycled newsprint. It is applied by spraying a moistened paper pulp into the joists and between the wall studs. The R value is 3.2 per inch. A common defect observed when inspecting houses is the floor and or ceiling insulation is covering the soffit region. Covering the soffit region limits or even eliminates attic ventilation, therefore potentially leading to future mold growth. When inspecting an attic, there are 4 major issues to be concerned with: insulation level, moisture infiltration, ventilation methods, and the presence of mold. When inspecting an attic, look for frost on the roof sheathing, condensation on the roof nails, black circles around the nails, the beginning signs of mold growth, and delaminated sheathing. There are 3 kinds of attics: unfinished, finished, and none, no attic access, although there are 4 styles of attics. There are 2 conditions we face when inspecting a finished attic area. Number 1, no access panel to the eaves or unfinished portion of the attic. If this is the case, then you are just going to do an interior inspection concentrating on staining on the ceiling. And 2, if there are access panels to the eaves or the peak, then you would report that area as attic area. Inspecting the eaves still gives you an opportunity to look at ventilation and insulation levels. Make sure you have clearance for the soffit ventilation to make it to the ridge. Sometimes you will be inspecting a house that has an attic but no access to it. This creates a problem for your client. The inspector isn't concerned because the SOPs do not require to inspect if he or she has no access, but we do have a responsibility to protect our client. Some inspectors will write this up as a defect because of the need to inspect for mold, ventilation, insulation, water penetration, electrical terminations, and bathroom vents. If the inspector points out all of the important reasons that access be created, you will be doing your client a service. You will be able to do a proper inspection, and your client will be able to check his insulation and look for leaks on a periodic schedule in the future. Mold is a type of fungus that grows in a dark and humid environment. There are hundreds of varieties of molds that are everywhere on every surface. There are mold spores floating in the air in almost every location. When these spores land on a surface in a humid environment, they will start to grow. As it grows, it gives off more spores and starts to spread. Mold spores can cause an allergic reaction when breathed in. Some people are not allergic, but many people are. This allergic reaction can be a serious health issue. Some molds are dangerous and can cause health issues with anyone. Some are more benign and only cause a reaction in a small percentage of people. It is not our job to determine which is which. If we see mold, we should report it because it is an environmental hazard. We are not doing a mold inspection, but we are informing our client if we see any substance that may be mold. There are 3 typical locations where inspectors will find mold: the basement, bathrooms, and attics. The 2 necessary environmental conditions that will cause mold to grow are heat and moisture. In basements, there are 2 general locations that you will find mold: on any wood or paneling that is low to the floor, because basements can become flooded, or because there may be water intrusion at the base of the walls. It is common to see mold at floor level. Floor joists above a boiler, furnace, or hot water heater. The heat and moisture from these pipes are a perfect environment for mold growth. Usually, mold found in basements are white in color. This white mold is because the temperatures are not as high as you would find in the attic. Attic mold is generally black. Typically, you will find mold in bathrooms in and around the shower area. Mold will grow on the ceiling or in the caulking. These are not very serious because of the limited size of the colony. Cleaning and increasing ventilation are normally all that is necessary. The attic is the most common location to find mold. Since the mid-1970s, homes have been constructed much tighter than in prior years in an effort to conserve energy. This tight construction makes the attic ventilation much more critical. If an attic is not vented properly, you will almost certainly find mold. Typically, the starting stages of mold in the attic are seen by dark circles around the roof nails in the roof decking. This is an indication that the attic ventilation needs to be improved. Normally, when an attic has mold, you will see black growth on the roof deck. It usually starts down by the soffits and grows up towards the peak. The EPA says that it becomes a significant issue if it is over 100 square feet in size. Once it is at that size, it needs to be professionally remediated. Take some time to review the next 2 slides and the inspection worksheet for attics.
This chapter dealt with attics. The reason attics is so important is really you're doing both the roof inspection now and the attic inspection. Roof inspection is done from the attic, going around the attic, making sure that you don't see moisture penetration between the rafters and on the deck. You may have, if you do have moisture penetration, you're going to have mold. Even if you don't have moisture penetration and you don't have proper levels of ventilation, you're going to have mold. So attic, in my estimation, is one of the two most important areas that we inspect. We inspect basements and we inspect attics. Everything else in between is cosmetic. But the attic is extremely important. When I crawl up into an attic, I'm looking for insulation levels, I'm looking for electrical wiring, I'm looking for mold growth, and I'm looking for ventilation. The rule of thumb on mold is if there is no mold, you probably have enough ventilation, because without the ventilation, you're going to get mold. So the mold growth tells me my attic isn't ventilated properly. The other thing we want to talk about when it comes to attics is access to these attics. There are some areas of the country that turn around and they have full attics, but their local ordinances don't require them to give the homeowners access into it. Well, in my opinion, this is wrong, and as a home inspector, I want to protect my client from all the possible things that may go wrong. And I have seen way too many things go wrong in an attic to then turn around and say, oh, if I don't have access into it, it's okay. So you decide how you want to handle that situation where you have an attic but you don't have access into it. Our standards of practice say we don't have to inspect that area. But sometimes following the standards of practice, you're protecting yourself more than your client. And I'm not crazy about that attitude either. So use your best judgment, do the best job you can for your client, but make sure you get as good a look at the attic as you possibly can. Good luck with the rest.